So what is histamine? So histamine is basically a chemical that is released by living organisms, and this includes like meats and plants as well. So it's released by our mast cells and basophils, which are a part of our immune system. So histamine is released by them in a healthy immune response. So it's present in a variety of tissues throughout our body, such as smooth muscles in the gut, bladder, and uterus, and cells in the skin. It's in foods, both plant and animal, as I mentioned. In varying amounts, they can be high, medium, or low, or they can be what's known as histamine liberators, which means it promotes the release of histamine from our body's tissues or cells. So what is its role? So histamine is required for a multitude of things. It regulates our circadian rhythm, which is our sleep-wake cycle. It supports healthy brain function, playing a role in mood, learning, and memory. It regulates appetite and promotes the secretion of gastric acid, which helps us to digest our food and absorb nutrients and kill any invading bacteria. And gastric and airway smooth muscle constriction and dilation, and mucus production to keep our airways lubricated so we don't have that constant cough reflex from irritated lungs. It impacts constriction and dilation of our blood vessels, which can affect our blood flow and pressure. It supports labor and embryo implantation by stimulating uterine smooth muscle contraction, and stimulates the production of estrogen, which supports ovulation and the production of progesterone post-ovulation and throughout pregnancy. So how is it regulated? It's regulated by what is called the DAO enzyme, which is diamine oxidase, which is predominantly present in the gut, mostly the small bowel. Histamine, which resides in our cells, is broken down by HNMT, which is histamine methyltransferase, which is present in the nervous system. After it is broken down by HNMT, it is further broken down by monoamine oxidase B, which is MOAB, which is within the brain. So it's broken down in 3 areas. So as you now know, histamine plays a role in a variety of functions, and this is not all of them either. This is just the key ones. Now I'm going to go into depth on all the symptoms. I'm not going to go into depth on all the symptoms histamine causes. If I were, we'd be here all night. So I'm going to highlight the key ones on the slides for you. So histamine stimulates the production of estrogen, which supports ovulation, and progesterone post-ovulation and throughout pregnancy. What we also need to know is that estrogen increases the release of histamine, which results in a feedback loop. So just to clarify that, histamine increases the release of estrogen and estrogen increases the release of histamine. So they work together. So when you look at the graph, you can see that estrogen increases to the highest point mid-cycle just prior to ovulation and slightly again just before menstruation, which is the solid green light line, the light one. So just prior to ovulation here, when it's at its peak, this is when histamine-related symptoms are likely to be exacerbated. So this may present in the form of common allergy-type symptoms, such as congested or runny nose, fatigue, itchy throat or mouth, itchy skin or rashes, such as eczema or hives or sneezing, for example. Progesterone, which is the dotted light green line, you can see here, just increasing after ovulation, and it decreases before menstruation, which is usually around day 28 of our cycle. It suppresses the release of histamine and therefore estrogen. So progesterone suppresses the release of histamine and therefore estrogen. When we have constantly high levels of increased histamine and estrogen within the brain, it can cause headaches or migraines, vertigo, nausea, motion sickness, anxiety, depression, insomnia, and temperature dysregulation. Histamine increases our pain sensitivity. It also plays a role in the contraction and relaxation of the uterus, which can result in increased uterine pain during menstruation, which is known as dysmenorrhea. It also increases the release of sebum from our skin, which can clog our pores, resulting in acne. Estrogen also down-regulates the DAO enzyme, which, as I mentioned before, the DAO enzyme degrades histamine. So estrogen reduces the DAO enzyme's capability. So if you have high levels of estrogen, your DAO enzyme is down-regulated, which therefore increases histamine within your body and impairs your ability to degrade it. So it's important to note that estrogen is needed in the brain for dopamine and serotonin regulation. It's just when it's dysregulated that there are issues. As women in particular, it is very important to have healthy regulation of our hormones because it has such a flow-on effect on our overall health and well-being. So I want you to make a note of these symptoms because a lot of them occur in pregnancy and the postpartum period as well, and some of them when we go into menopause. Our hormones are just fantastic. Now, there are already many changes that occur during pregnancy that most of us are aware of. What we may not be aware of is the role of histamine in these processes. The symptoms I therefore want to focus on are what histamine impacts. Now, I want you to remember here that the hormones in pregnancy are changing. As you can see in the chart, estrogen increases as the pregnancy progresses, which is the solid orange line. As I mentioned before, there is a direct correlation between estrogen and histamine. Histamine increases the release of estrogen, and estrogen increases the release of histamine. Histamine impacts the implantation of the fetus due to its effect on the uterine contractions and can result in miscarriage. Histamine plays an important role in supporting the secretion of hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which, if out of balance, can result in symptoms such as nausea and vomiting, reflux, appetite changes, bloating, and altered bowel habits. It isn't uncommon for pregnant women to experience constipation. Now, this could be for a multitude of reasons, such as a low-fiber diet or not enough fluids, for example, but it is interesting to note that histamine can contribute to this due to its effects on the intestinal smooth muscles and their contractibility. Nausea and vomiting is one of the most common symptoms experienced by women in their pregnancy, particularly in the first and sometimes third trimester. Evolving research indicates that the DAO enzyme, which degrades histamine, may play a part in nausea and vomiting in pregnancy as the DAO enzyme in trimester 2, when nausea and vomiting tend to cease, increases. So as you can see in the chart, the HCG, the human chorionic gonadotropin hormone, which I hate to say, is the green solid line there, is still very high at weeks 12 to 14, which indicates that it's not the only cause of nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, as once thought. Histamine supports healthy placenta formation by promoting vascular growth in the new tissue. There is an association between low histamine and low DAO, which is the DAO enzyme, and the increased likelihood of developing preeclampsia in pregnancy, which is interesting. Histamine dysregulation can cause migraines and headaches, brain fog, poor memory, concentration, mood changes, temperature dysregulation, dizziness and vertigo due to its effect on our central nervous system and neurotransmitter functions such as serotonin, which tends to be low in those who experience depression. It impacts norepinephrine, which regulates adrenaline, and acetylcholine, which plays a role in memory, learning, and attention. So as I've mentioned many times before, histamine has an impact on the uterus and the placenta contraction, which causes cramps, but it also facilitates and progresses labour. It supports vasodilation, which is the opening of the vessels, and contractibility, which is the pumping action of the heart via histamine receptors, which can cause palpitations, hypertension, and vertigo, along with the pregnancy-associated changes in blood volume, which are common symptoms experienced during pregnancy. Histamine has a direct effect on our respiratory function through stimulation of bronchial smooth muscles. This, along with the physical changes of pregnancy to our rib cage due to the diaphragm being pushed upwards and the ribs opening up to facilitate the increase in oxygen requirements, impacts the body's ability to breathe, which can result in shortness of breath, which is another common symptom. It plays a role in the sleep-wake cycle, promoting wakefulness. Therefore, when it is dysregulated, it can contribute to insomnia, which is a common symptom also experienced particularly later in pregnancy, more so in trimester 3, which is also attributed to the uncomfortable sleep positions women have to lie in. But considering estrogen levels are at their highest at the end of pregnancy, this makes sense because histamine is also at its highest. And as I said before, estrogen increases histamine and histamine increases estrogen. That's definitely one thing I want you guys to take away from today. Histamine increases the pain sensitivity by activating pain-transmitting nerve fibers in our body. So, of course, going into labor, I'm sure many women would want to reduce the pain as much as possible, and managing histamine is an important factor in labor preparation as well as progression. Many women experience edema and swelling in their pregnancy. In fact, it is one of the more common symptoms experienced. Now, you may be thinking that histamine swelling tends to be localized, such as insect bites or topical allergic reactions, but it's not always the case. Now, during normal pregnancy, total body water increases by about 6 to 8 litres, which of course impacts edema, but where histamine can play a role is when our mast cells degranulate. So our mast cells break down and they release histamine. It's a part of a healthy immune response, which can contribute to the overall edema experienced by women. So it may play a role in its severity, especially as mentioned previously, due to the increase in histamine towards the end of pregnancy and therefore histamine. Therefore histamine. So histamine is commonly linked with skin conditions, which most of us are probably aware of, such as psoriasis, hives, and eczema, and can cause skin flushing and itching, which is experienced in some women in pregnancy, but it's one of the less common symptoms. Some women also experience resolved allergy symptoms during pregnancy due to the increase in the DAO production within the placenta. Now, during the postpartum period, it is likely that women will experience increased stress, disrupted sleep, and changes in mood, whether that be due to the newborn baby or partner-induced, or it could be both or either. Now, many of the same symptoms experienced during pregnancy can continue into the postpartum period. Once the placenta is passed during the delivery process, the volume of DAO enzyme dramatically decreases, which can result in the exacerbation or worsening of histamine-related symptoms. So the placenta creates its own DAO enzyme, and the body also has its DAO enzyme. The mum has a DAO enzyme, and also in her gut and also in the placenta. So now some women experience an alleviation of allergy symptoms during pregnancy, which then reappear or are worse postpartum. So when you look at the graph, you can see that estradiol, which is estrogen, which is the solid blue line, and progesterone, which is the solid green line, dramatically decreases immediately after delivery. You can see here that the birth is just the start of that square there. Although there is a decrease in estrogen, we need to remember that for the last 6 or so months, the body has had high levels of estrogen and therefore high levels of histamine. Now, not all of the histamine in the blood would have been degraded by the DAO enzyme in the placenta. It is thought that the DAO in the placenta is to protect the fetus from higher levels of circulating histamine in the blood from being passed through, not necessarily to protect the mum from high levels of histamine. What I commonly see in practice is postpartum women who have had minor allergic responses such as itching, tingling, sinusitis, and low-grade rashes prior to pregnancy, which then become severe or uncontrollable post-delivery. Other cases are women who have had no allergic reactions or symptoms prior to pregnancy, which they are now experiencing postpartum. This can be due to the changes in the DAO enzyme, the passing of the placenta, as well as hormone detoxification issues and gastrointestinal changes that happen during pregnancy. It isn't uncommon for these clients to have gastrointestinal disorders such as IBS, food intolerances, celiac disease, or SIBO, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, which can wreak havoc on the digestive system and therefore histamine degradation and regulation. So as previously mentioned, histamine plays a role in healthy mood, as does our gastrointestinal health via the gut-brain axis. So our gut health impacts our neurotransmitters within our brain, which support healthy mood function. Now, postpartum depression can be complex but these two factors must be considered in this onset and progression. Oxytocin, along with histamine, can cause increased itch sensations. Histamine stimulates the secretion of oxytocin, making it crucial in labour and breastfeeding. So it is important to remember that histamine is necessary. However, it is when it is dysregulated that it can cause issues. Now, most of us are familiar with cortisol, which is known as the stress hormone. So you can see in the graph here again, cortisol is the yellow line. Now, this decreases slowly in the months post-delivery. Now, this graph is generalized and it can be different for each individual. Some may have increased cortisol due to increased stress or cortisol dysregulation. And some of us may be even more stressed before that. And we all have stress in our lives, even when we're not pregnant or in the postpartum period. So there is a direct correlation between cortisol increasing the release of histamine. So when we're stressed, whether that be emotionally or physically during exercise, for example, our histamine levels increase, which can exacerbate histamine-related symptoms, some of which that I've mentioned throughout this. So which stress is, of course, an extremely common occurrence in pregnancy and the postpartum period with everything that the female body is going through. So now I haven't listed all of the symptoms that histamine can cause during the postpartum period, as it's all of the symptoms that I have mentioned so far during menstruation and pregnancy, which can also arise during this postpartum period. Unfortunately, it may be worse for some. So I'm sure you can now see there's a complex interrelation between the different hormones and histamine. So first of all, congratulations and well done for making it through this far. Some of this content is a little dense and there may be a lot of terms that you aren't familiar with. But here is what I want you to take away from this webinar. Histamine may not be the only cause of the symptoms I have mentioned. It may be a driving factor, a contributing factor, or not involved at all. But it is important not to dismiss it as a possibility. Remember that histamine dysregulation is a symptom. It is not a condition. It is a symptom of another condition, which in my experience is commonly linked to the gut and can be due to impaired methylation, which is a topic for another webinar. So once you know the cause of histamine dysregulation, it is easy to treat and manage. Firstly, you must identify the cause and treat it. Make sure you get the support that you need. If you're not feeling right, feeling like you're banging your head against the wall, speak to another health professional that will listen. And of course, don't delay. There's no point wasting any time feeling unwell. It sounds ludicrous when you say it and hear it out loud, but a lot of people do this. They rationalize and downplay and normalize how they feel, even if they know it isn't right. So here's a lovely quote that I love for you guys. So it's not enough to just live, but to thrive. So I want you to consider, like, what does that mean for you? What does thriving mean? Does it mean being able to run after the kids? Does it mean not having to take a sick day off because you're menstruating, you got severe period pain or migraines or headaches, for example? What does that look like for you?